Bad leaders are everyone's worst nightmare, giving you the ultimate playbook to lead, inspire, and grow your team. Better tech leadership powered by Brainhub.
So I'd like to start with your professional journey. Can you share a bit about your journey from being a student at ETH Zurich and UC Berkeley to becoming the head of engineering at Roche? Specifically, what were some key turning points or challenges you had to overcome? And why did you choose to follow the fields of data and cloud? Big question, but I'll let you speak.
So my first job after my academic career was in private banking. And there it was at Juliusberg here in Zurich, in the advisory part of the bank, which was extremely interesting because you get a broad view of everything. Although when I started, for half a year, I was doing Excel. So it was very classical. I was hired as a data scientist back then. People didn't even know what data science was, and I was doing Excel as a first half year.
Macros?
Yeah. So it was a lot of automatizations of things, but then people saw that I'm doing cool stuff, started to do more like dashboards, and people liked it a lot. So I took on more responsibility on the BA side of things in advisory. We were also piloting some recommendation engines back then, but it was never really rolled out then. That's where I first started to realize it's not about technology, it's also about processes and people, because if people don't want to adopt something, a recommendation system, then you have already lost, right? So it was very interesting to be in the finance industry. There were also some downsides, I would say. I was always joking that the biggest innovator in finance is the regulator, because banks are very risk averse. So it's very difficult to move stuff, which ultimately also was one of the reasons that I jumped votes. Also, the entire cloud adoption was very low, so it was very difficult to move things forward. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot from the people that I worked with, because it was also my first job after university. So it was good. From there, I became cloud consultant. That was also interesting. I was working for Teradata for over 1.5 years, and they sent me to different clients across Europe and also different industries. So for me, in that 1.5 years, I fortunately could see many different industries, from oil and gas to aviation to retailers. So it was nice, but it was also a bit reality check, because I was thinking that the financing and banking sector is a bit behind, but it turned out that almost everybody is behind of the cloud and data analytics curve. So I think we're seeing a two-class society where we have Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, and then nothing, and then the rest. So it was also a bit shocking to see that. And also for me, ultimately, I was also not so happy to be a consultant, because there was no skin in the game for me. I was just, advising, helping, but I was not owning a solution. So for me, when I had the opportunity to end with Roche, my boss, he explained to me, what possibilities there are. And for me, it was a great opportunity to take on more ownership, because this was exactly what I was looking for. And when I started at Roche, I started as a machine learning engineer. So the goal was to deploy some ML solutions, but I had to realize that the infrastructure was not quite there yet, the data was not quite there yet. So we started to build out like a cloud platform for data and analytics, greenfield. And we started off with 5 people, and now we grew that to like 150 people. So it was quite a nice journey for the last 3 years. I learned a lot. I always say it was a bit like having a startup within an enterprise, with all the up and down sides of it. So good thing is that I don't have to go to raise that much money because it's a bit easier because you're in an enterprise. You also have a global reach, so it's easier to bring in people. But of course, it's still an enterprise. So you have a legacy. You need to take care of that legacy as well. So that was a bit difficult, and of course also politics.
Okay. You said that many sectors out there are still behind those big tech companies like Amazon, Facebook, Stripe, you name them. What are the aspects that are still not there? Is it adoption of the technologies? Is it the way they work? Both of those things, or something else?
It's a good question, and I think it's multiple things. I think the foundations are not there, and also there is probably not enough appreciation for that, right? I mean, many companies don't understand how to collect and curate data to make it useful. So they want to have machine learning applications, but in order to get there, you need to get the basics right. So, I mean, there's this very famous pyramid where you need to have the infrastructure, data collected, and then you can start to do like the more advanced analytics use cases. So you need to do your homework, and that's where most companies still struggle. I mean, people think Facebook and Google, they're great at machine learning, but that is just a result of them being great in data collection and curation. That for sure is one aspect, but then also the missing practices, as you've put it, right? I think it's really a maturity on the engineering level that has very much to do with the DNA of companies. And I heard many people on the business side saying, oh, but we are not Google. We are a pizza company, or we are a car manufacturer, right? So it's really also the mindset that needs to change to give engineering the relevance it should have.
Sure. Speaking of Roche, can you describe your responsibilities as head of engineering global product strategy at Roche, and specifically, what are the most rewarding and challenging aspects of your role or job?
Sure. Maybe I start first with what part I'm responsible. As you can imagine, Roche is a huge company, and GTM, the go-to-market domain, is basically the commercial domain. So that is the marketing, the digital. This is also how we interact with the HCOs, the healthcare organizations like hospitals, or the HCPs, the healthcare professional, the doctors and nurses. So it's really the last mile, I would say. And I'm overseeing the data and analytics part of that. So what we have built is really a platform, but then also global products, data products. Those are like dashboards, but also ML solutions, and also local ones that is for country-specific use cases as well. And the main emphasis for me in the last 3 years was to not look at things isolated, meaning that for me it was important to connect technology to the people and processes. And those three things are very much interconnected. And sometimes they influence each other heavily. To give you an example, in the last 5 to 10 years, there was a huge shift from ETL, so extract, transform, load, to ELT, extract, load, and transform. Now, this change of a process also is reflected on how we organize the people. So that means we have what we call data engineers. They're solely responsible of bringing the data to the platform. They don't understand really the data, but they're really, really good in infrastructure as a code. They're very good in APIs, JDBC, all that interface kind of stuff, and how to write jobs to bring the data. And then we have guys, what we call them analytics engineers, and they are only responsible for doing the transformations on the platform itself, right? So that's an example of how the change in technology and the change in the process for the technology is also shaping the topology of the teams. And I think that's where all the things come together. It's really the technology part with the people and the process part that you need to look holistically. Also, many technology decisions were also shaped on the people. Another example is one of our core components of the platform is a data warehouse, a cloud data warehouse. Of course, we could have also chosen to go with Spark or some other fancy technology. But looking within Roche, many talents that we have, they're very good in SQL. And it makes more sense to leverage that talent. It's a lot easier to upskill them to use a cloud data warehouse than it would be to upskill them to use Spark, right? So that's where I think it's tricky to look at all three dimensions, but I think it's important if you want to be successful to really reflect on those components.
Interesting that the teams are formed around those domains. Interesting.
It's really like, if you look at those two are just two of what we call capabilities. So if you look at the data lifecycle, there's certain capabilities that you need. We have mentioned the onboarding. We have also mentioned the data pipelines, the transformation. What is between actually is what we have called the data analyst that is working together with the business to define the business rules. And then the analytics engineer is taking over and implements them in a pipeline. We also have one capability, which is information engineering or data architecture, which is helping, of course, as well, how to organize the data and make it useful and reusable. Then we have ML engineering, which is an important capability. Also what we call visual analytics, DevOps, Kubernetes engineering, and cloud engineering. So it's really specializations, I would say. And I always compare it. I don't know if you have ever watched kids football, like the tiny ones. When they play football, they're kind of goalkeeper, but also strike. Like they do everything. Right. And I think this is also how people were approaching data. It was like, okay, you're responsible for the data onboarding, but then also for defining the business rules and implementing that. And it's great, but it's also difficult.
Can be created.
That's the point. I think it's not scalable as well, right? So I think to really become scalable, you need to become more professional. And if you have people that are really focused now, I mean, my data engineer, they will bring a new data source in 1 or 2 days because they're really good at that, right? So I think you can improve the quality, the agility by being more professional. So the football team that we have now, if you have clear positions, right? And everybody knows the role. And that's how I think you can definitely improve the quality of the data products you build.
If you were to choose, what's the most important aspect of your accountability? Or what part of tech versus people versus process gets most of your attention?
I think it changed also a little bit. I think in the beginning, of course, when you set up the architecture and everything, the technology part was a bit bigger. Also, as you can imagine, growing a team from 5 to 150, other aspects become more important. That you realize you need to somehow organize these people. The communication aspects become more important, or standardizing also the processes, the development cycles, etc. So I think it's tricky to shift, the attention to where it needs to be. So I would say that technology aspects became a little bit less relevant because also we haven't changed the tech stack that much in the last 3 years. Of course, there's always adoption that you need to do. But for me, since in the last 3 years, my role was also, I would say, cloud migration, because we have been moving a lot of the workloads that were in legacy system like Hadoop or Oracle. We're moving them to the cloud. And that has a lot to do with change management. Again, more the people and processes part. Then we are also introducing new CRM systems, new transactional systems. So I would say we're also helping a lot on the digital transformation part of the entire organization, right? New digital channels. So there are a lot of challenges when it comes to trying to unify all of that. But I mean, I'm also quite happy that I could drive a lot of those topics from the engineering side as well. But it's challenging because nobody really wants to change, right? So to make people change and see the benefit of changing, you also need to be a bit of a salesman, which naturally people in engineering don't enjoy so much. I'm also not enjoying it that much, but I acknowledge that it's important.
Yeah, I think it's for me, it's completely different way of communicating. I think that, talking with the machine, it's just enough to say it once, but getting message across that is really complex, and requires some change, and is related with the discomfort usually, or fear. It's a completely different game for me.
It is, and I think what is also challenging is that you need to meet the people where they are at. So there's a huge spectrum, of course, right? So some of them, it's quite easy. They understand very quickly. Some of them, they take a bit longer. And that was also interesting to roll out that data and analytics platform across the globe. You could see, certain countries or affiliates, as we call them, they're super mature, and it was not so difficult conversation. And with some others, took a bit longer.
Yeah, it's a distribution, right? It's okay. I'd like to speak a little bit about go-to-market domain. So my question is, what role does data science play in the GTM domain at Roche?
Yeah, I mean, it always played a crucial role because it was one of the first use cases that we had in mind when we started to build the platform. So also there, it was a recommendation engine for our sales force, for the workforce that we have in the field, to improve the interactions they have with the doctors and the hospitals to make that more relevant. And there also it's a lot about collecting the data. I mean, everybody's talking about customer 360, right? So it's a lot about providing the relevant information when needed. And there were super interesting use cases, right? So there is, I think, 15 million articles in PubMed, which is the publication for the medical journey, basically, right? So one of the use cases that we have is, okay, what articles could be relevant for a certain doctor or not? So it was always part of our journey as well. So it's really the more traditional BI stuff, but then also the machine learning stuff where we try to put the dent into that as well. What is important though is that we were always trying to integrate the machine learning aspect seamlessly into the work process of the people. So we didn't want to have an extra application for machine learning. So the results of the recommendation engine that we have built is fed back to the CRM system, right? Because the sales force is already interacting with the CRM system, so it is important that they can keep the same ecosystem of tools that they already have.
Nice.
Because I think it's already hard enough for machine learning to build a machine learning solution. And then if you have an extra tool, it puts an additional barrier for people to leverage.
Sure. We spoke a little bit about people, we spoke about process, but I'd like to get a little bit more specific and ask, what do you consider the most important aspects of DevOps practices? And Could you share an instance where a specific aspect of those practices was critical to the success of a given project?
Yeah, it's a super relevant question. I mean, for me, DevOps is not really practice, it's culture. So you need to establish this culture. And this is, of course, it's not an easy thing, especially in a lot of traditional companies. And I mean, I had the same issue in Roche where for me, it was important to put DevOps first. Now, where we started, after some time, I got asked, well, when are you going to hand over to the operations team? And I was like, there's no operations team. We are DevOps. So it's really the guys that are building the solution. They're also going to operate the solution. This is what DevOps is about, right? I think that showed me that even the most fundamental thing of DevOps, sometimes people don't understand. And that's a challenge, right? And because this is the most important aspect. And I think now people start to realize, and I think already from just combining the development teams with the operation teams, that there's no separation anymore, it improves the quality naturally. Because if you know you need to operate, you put a bit more effort into building a solution that is more robust, right? So for me, this already has a huge impact on your mindset if you're building out stuff. But that is not obvious for many companies, including my own. But I think now they can see the benefit of that. Of course, there's a huge uphill battle in that because people don't know. They're scared to change. There were, of course, also a lot of question on handover documents. And I was like, look, it's the same team. We don't need the handover documents. We need to document, yes, but it's not that we need to have like this massive checklists and stuff that traditionally were there. So ultimately for me, that was one main driver. It's as simple as just having one team that is doing both. And then also we were really following a strong everything as a code mindset. So our entire platform is deployed with CDK, which is the default for AWS infrastructure as a code deployment. Our entire pipelines leverage heavily dbt and SQL. Everything is code, right? So also that is a bit of a mindset shift because historically speaking, not everything was put in a Git repo, right? But now we have the Git repo. And not only that, we have what for me also was a main driver, we have a monorepo. Now, what is a monorepo is basically you put everything into just one repo. And we had long discussions what we should do. Should we go for a multi-repo, monorepo setup? But I think for me, this monorepo setup had so many benefits for transparency, for reusability, for all this kind of things that maybe are not so evident if you start off, but I think it paid off. Of course, it's also a bit tricky because suddenly there is 150 developers working in one repo, right? So you really need to step up the game on frameworks around, pre-commit and like all this technical solution that help. But ultimately, I think that was for me also a major aspect to have everything in the same repo, and then it's a lot easier to keep people aligned, of course.
Was it something new that you guys had to introduce?
The commercial domain at Roche in pharma was pretty much fragmented. And that's also why it was not so easy to establish the monorepo in the first place. And again, it has also to do with people and process aspects here, because of course, what you're creating with a monorepo is a lot of transparency, but you need to create trust between teams for the transparency. And it's funny, right? Because everybody wants trust, but I don't want to be the one to show what So I think ultimately it has also a lot to do with creating the community and the trust within the community to work together. So it's not only a technical solution saying Monorepo and then everything works out of the box. It has a lot to do also with engaging the people, creating more trust within the team to make that successful.
It's actually changing the process to catalyze something like trust, or catalyze the exchange of context or accountability, which is basically driven by how you establish the team or how you make some even technical decision. Interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, here I can really recommend the book for me on DevOps, which is called Accelerate. Yeah, so I mean, for me, they go in really depth on how all those things, come together. And of course, the trust within teams, that's a huge aspect in the entire DevOps. That you're not blaming each other, but helping each other. So for me, it was astonishing when I read the book to realize all the aspects that are interconnected, So that's also why for me, it's a super important part to establish this as part of the culture.
Sure. In this book, I really love the graph that they put, like they build it throughout the book, like they give a piece there, and finally they show the entire thing on the relationships and what causes the causation. In fact, it's a great book. It's great. As an experienced manager, how do you balance your time between managing your team and actively participating in the implementation, if that's the case? I read on the bio that might be the case.
Yeah, so I'm still part of on the implementation side, but I'm not actively contributing that much code. I mean, my team is always joking because most of my code now is marked out. So, but I think for me, it's very important to stay close to the implementation side, but more from a reverse perspective. What I mean by that is, for me, it's very important to give my tech leads all the context they need to make the right decisions, right? And if they make the wrong decisions, I think I need to blame myself for not giving them enough context. So that's why for me, being still part of on the implementation side is important, not actively, but more passively, right? So that's why I think it's relevant to keep somewhat close, but not in a sense that I decide on implementation aspects. Although, of course, sometimes that happens as well. But I try to give the people the freedom and the context to do the right things, right? So Hastings, the Netflix CEO, I think he put it brilliantly when he said it's important to have highly aligned teams that are loosely coupled. And this is what I'm trying to achieve as well. So we kind of have a skilled, agile approach. So I'm always part of this sprint plannings that we have with all the teams. I'm also part of the sprint reviews. But then during the sprint, I give the teams the freedom, and I mean it works super well if you have good tech leads.
Mm-hmm. And how do you align them specifically? Does it involve talking a lot about strategy, or you use some specific tools for executing the strategy, like OKRs, KPIs? How do you keep those teams aligned?
It's a very good question, and I think here probably I also have room for improvements to formalize that better. But it's also quite challenging because the business side sometimes is not that mature, and it's a lot of change. And to manage that change that is coming from the business side it's also quite tricky. So ultimately, I'm trying to give business context. I think this is important for as much as possible. Of course, trying to shield all the noise that is also coming, but to kind of filter the relevant stuff. and just pass down the relevant stuff that is coming. I think that for me is important, but it could be a bit more formalized. So we are not currently working with KPIs and OKRs as much as I would like to, but then sometimes it's also very difficult because with KPIs, it's very difficult to capture. I had recently exactly that conversation, right? Like technical depths, for example, and to invest in technical depths that is not bringing any business value. How do you capture that in a KPI to say, oh, in the future, it will be easier to deliver features, but currently we're not delivering any features, right? So I think it's very tricky sometimes to come up with KPIs in the first place. That's why we have not spent too much time thinking in that terms. It is relevant though to show business value, right? I think that was always important also for us to show that success, but it's more like success stories than KPIs or OKRs.
Sure. Referring to the Accelerate book, for me, there were quite a lot of inspiring ways how to measure things. Some of them were subjective, and like many people out there, like preferably measurable outcomes that are objective, but still, like they ask, for example, for deployment pain. That was a cool metric. I mean, cool way to ask about, for example, tech debt. So.
I agree. I mean, for us, I think one of the metrics also is lead time they put, right? And of course, if I translate that would be something I mentioned earlier is how long does it take for us to tap into a new data source? Like how long does it take for us in average to onboard a new data source, right? Or deployment cycles. So currently we have 2 weekly sprints. We deploy on a 2 weekly basis to production. Of course, if you compare that, and they make that comparison also of companies deploy sometimes 200 times per day. But I think what is also important to point out, the book is very much focused on software development. Now, data and analytics, slightly different, right? Because there is this data dimension that adds a lot of complexity on top of that. And that's where I'm already happy with the 2 weekly deployment to production. I think it's a solid start.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you stay up to date with rapidly changing tech landscape? And do you have any resources or practices you'd recommend?
I would say like one big source is my social network. I have many friends working in tech companies or other similar roles. So it's always good to exchange with them to understand what is happening in their space. And also, I'm quite old school. I have an RSS feed that I read regularly, where I'm subscribed to some of the news feed that for me are relevant. So a lot of the cloud things, of course, are there, but on the machine learning side as well, analytics side as well. Podcasts, I think, is also for me something that I like a lot, like audiobooks as well, or books in general. So it's a bit diverse, diverse sources for sure.
Okay, speaking of the changing tech landscape, I'd like to ask you what trends or emerging technologies are you most excited about and why?
I mean, of course, I think first answer would be what is happening currently with the LLMs and ChatGPT. But then there's also a huge hype around that. So we can also keep it on the side. But I think it will have a huge impact. For sure, it already has a huge impact now. And it's only difficult to foresee what is the impact. But beyond that, I'm also excited about the open table format conversations. So Hudi, Iceberg, Delta Lake, what is happening there to make data lakes ACID compatible. So that is interesting to see. it's super relevant to my line of work and to everybody that's doing data and analytics in the cloud. I think it will be interesting to see like what impact it has. In general, I'm also excited about the self-service topic, although it is a bit overhyped as well. But there is a new AWS service called Data Zone that is in preview now that is going more into the direction of self-service platforms, which will be extremely interesting to see. And then, of course, also on the BI side with tools like ThoughtSpot, it's interesting to observe what is happening on the self-service BI topic as well. Although, again, those are tools you still need to do your homework. So self-service BI tools will not magically solve your problem. I mean, we invested in the last 2 years heavily on the data model to have a robust, good, simplified data model that then can be used with self-service. So I think it's not a silver bullet, but it's interesting to see that the technology can shape aspects. Again, self-service is a different way of working. So the process is also changing, right? So it's not like Tableau anymore. You cannot use ThoughtSpot the same way you're using Tableau. It's a different ways of working. So again, it's interesting to see how self-service can shape the business processes. But it's still a long way to go, I would say, because self-service, to get it right, is super difficult because you need to cater and to align and simplify. I think simplifying is extremely hard. People don't appreciate it enough to make things look simple, because when they are simple, they think it's easy, but it's not. Right? So that's why I have a huge appreciation for all that work to make things abstracted in a simpler way.
You mentioned that you had taught dancing. I want to ask about that, and how did this thing influence your professional life as an engineer and as a leader?
Yeah, I think it had a huge impact on my life because, of course, as an engineer, you're more of an introvert type. And also going to a very technical university, you're centered most on your engagement on technical aspects. You're also taught at university that technology can solve all the problems. And then, of course, having another world that I could relate to, the dancing and the dance and the teaching, for me, gave me a completely different view on things. It was also teaching me a lot of the social skills that maybe you're not taught at university, that you should be actually, but you're not. So for me, how to interact with people, how to read people, how to teach them, how to meet them, especially on the teaching parts, I think you learn a lot also about yourself. So I think if you want to become a self-reflected leader, I think it's important to work on yourself as well. And I think it helped me a lot. I mean, the dancing helped me also to learn more about my body and being more self-reflective and on how I move. But then also the teaching was helping me be a bit more self-reflective when it comes to interaction with the people. So I think for me, that was a crucial skill set that I learned that for me, probably in the last couple of years was equally or even more important than the technical aspect.
Interesting. As I said, it resonates with me very much as a former ski instructor. Yannick, thank you very much. It was great. Thank you for the answers and the insights.
Sure. Thanks a lot for having me.
Better Tech Leadership powered by Brainhub. Follow Leszek on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Better Tech Leadership newsletter.